5 women before her had tried to be his wife. Every single one ran away screaming in less than 7 days. The townsfolk called him cursed. The last bride came back shaking so badly they had to put her on the next train east. She said she'd rather die in the desert than spend one more night under his roof. So when Ruth Brooks, a 32-year-old widow who had already buried a husband and 3 children, stepped off that stagecoach to marry a man she'd never met, everyone in town just started counting down the days. Elias Crow was half Apache, half white, belonging to neither world. A man so guarded, so broken by loss, that he had driven away every woman who ever tried to love him. But Ruth wasn't like the others. She didn't come here looking for a fairy tale. She came here to stop running from her grief and start building something real. The question was, could she survive past day 7? And what dark secret had made all the others flee? Real love isn't a feeling you fall into. It's a choice you make every single day, especially when it's terrifying. This story proves that 2 broken people don't make a disaster. They make a partnership if they're brave enough to stop protecting themselves and start building together. If you believe that the best love stories aren't fairy tales but real choices, drop a comment telling me what you've chosen to build. And if you want more stories about imperfect people finding their way to each other, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Your support means everything. Ruth stepped from the stagecoach, a woman of 32 in a clean but mended dress. The driver, a man named Polk, offered no help. He just pointed a thumb toward the jagged mountains. "The Crow Ranch is 8 miles that way," he mumbled, and left her with a single trunk and a whole lot of questions. As the dust settled, the door to the general store opened. A woman with a flour-dusted apron stared. "You're the new one for Crow." It was not a question. "I'm Ruth Brooks." The woman, Mrs. Bledsoe, gave a dry chuckle. "An arrangement, they call it. The last one came walking back those 8 miles. Said she would rather die in the desert than spend another night under his roof. She was shaking so hard we had to get her on the next train east. My advice? Turn around and go home." Ruth just stood there, calm as you please. "Thank you, ma'am, but I am done with running from things." At that moment, a silence fell over the street. A lone rider on a big bay horse was coming. It was Elias Crow. He was tall with broad shoulders and skin the color of old copper. His father was a white scout, his mother Apache, and he looked like he belonged to neither and both. He was not wearing a gun, just a knife. But as he rode closer, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. He pulled his horse to a stop and simply stared at her. His eyes were so dark you felt like they could see right through you. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice deep and rough. "Mr. Crow," she answered, not looking away. A faint hint of surprise crossed his face. "You are older than I expected." She did not miss a beat. "And you are exactly as described." For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched. He swung off his horse, lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, and tied it down. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can learn," she told him. He nodded, got back in the saddle, and held out his hand. "Today, you ride with me." She took it, and he pulled her up behind him. They rode out of town without a word. For the first hour, there was only the sound of the wind and the horse. Then Elias pointed to a line of green trees in the distance. "Water," he said. "An arroyo. It feeds the ranch. I built the pipe system to the house myself." Ruth saw her chance. "Was that before or after your first wife?" The air went cold. She felt every muscle in his back go tight. The easy quiet between them was gone, replaced by something sharp and guarded. His letters said he was a widower, but Ruth was beginning to understand that some ghosts never leave the land. "That's a shame," Ruth said, her voice soft but sure. "Grief has a long memory, Mr. Crow." He shifted in his saddle, and for a moment the hardness in his face cracked. "Everyone's lost someone. What matters is if you let it break you." She met his gaze. "It did both, but I'm still here." He gave a slow nod, then turned back to the trail. "An hour more to the ranch. We'll see if you last longer than the others." His tone was flat, like he was talking about the weather. "I'll last," she promised. The Crow Ranch wasn't the rough shack she'd pictured. Tucked in a bend of the Aoyo, a proper adobe house stood strong, built to last. A real barn, a smokehouse, and corrals showed this was no desperate homestead. This place had roots. "You build all this?" she asked. "Some. Bought it from a family that moved on." After helping her down, Elias started listing the chores without looking at her. The list was long, from mucking the barn to mending fences. He didn't expect her to do it all, but he needed a partner, not a guest. "The other women," he started, his jaw tight. "They expected a soft life. That is not what I need. I need someone who understands that out here everyone works." Ruth looked him square in the eye. "Mr. Crow, I am 32 years old. I have buried a husband and 3 children. I ran a boarding house that would have broken most folks. I came here to build a life that is mine, on land I can call my own." She took a steadying breath. "I do not know your ways yet, but I am a fast learner. What I do know is hard work. You tell me what needs doing, and I will do it. I'm here to build something. The only question is if you are ready for that kind of partner." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Elias Crow smiled, and it changed his whole face, wiping away the years of hardship. "Come on," he said, grabbing her trunk. "I will show you the house. We will start with the chickens. They are the least likely to hurt you." The house was cool and clean, with handmade furniture and beautiful woven blankets on the walls. "My mother's work," he explained. He showed her to a simple room. "It is not much, but it is yours." The room was plain but spotless, with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the pasture. On the windowsill sat a small jar of desert wildflowers. "Did you put these here?" she asked. Elias looked almost shy. "Figured a woman might like them." "Thank you." He just nodded. "Change into work clothes. Meet me outside in 10 minutes. After he left, Ruth stood in the quiet room. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a stranger and build a new life from scratch. For the first time since losing her family, she felt a flicker of hope. She was alive. She quickly changed and went outside, ready for whatever came next. He started her with the chickens, then showed her how to milk the gentle cow, Bella. "She likes you," Elias noted from the barn door. "She usually kicks strangers." "I get along with stubborn females," Ruth replied, not missing a beat. The afternoon was a crash course in ranch life. He showed her the irrigated garden, the smokehouse, and the root cellar. He explained about rotating cattle, the good grazing spots, and the dangers of the land. He talked more in those few hours than she reckoned he had in months, and she listened to every word. Understanding how things worked was the only kind of power that mattered. "You taken all this in?" he asked as the sun began to dip. "Most of it. What I don't, I will ask about." The others never asked. They just looked scared. Ruth wiped the sweat from her brow. "Mr. Crow, I need you to hear this. I am not the others. Their story is not my story. I ask questions because I intend to understand this place." He watched her with that steady, unreadable gaze. "You are not what I expected." "Good or bad?" she challenged. "Too soon to tell," he said. But for the first time there was a hint of warmth in his voice. That first night, Ruth made a simple supper of beans, salt pork, and skillet cornbread. Elias ate every bite without a word, but his silence felt like a compliment. Later, sitting on the porch under a vast, starry sky, she felt the day's hard labor settle into her bones. Elias finally spoke, his voice low. He told her this life was not easy, and neither was he. If she wanted to leave before the week was out, he would take her back to town, no questions asked. Ruth stood and faced him in the starlight. She told him she was not running away from her old life, but running toward a new one. She had seen how he cared for his animals and how he was an honest man, and that was more than enough. She was staying. Elias looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "The other women," he said, never made it past 7 days. If she was still there on day 8, they would make it permanent. The next morning began before dawn. Elias took her to mend a broken fence in the east pasture. The work was grueling. Ruth held the heavy rails steady while he hammered, her arms trembling with the effort. Sweat soaked her dress, and her hands screamed in protest. He told her she could rest, but she refused, saying she would rest when the job was done. When the last rail was secure, the fence stood strong again. Elias looked at her with a newfound respect. "You are tougher than you look," he said. The days fell into a rhythm of shared work. They learned each other in the quiet spaces between chores. One afternoon, they found the water in a stock tank had been fouled. Elias swore, saying it would take half a day to drain and scrub. Ruth looked at the problem and offered a solution. They could siphon the water to the garden instead of wasting it. Her smart thinking saved them hours of work. For the first time, he saw her not just as a helper, but as a true partner. That evening, Elias asked why she had come all this way. Ruth spoke of losing her job and having nowhere to turn. She told him his letter stood out because it was honest. He had not promised an easy life, only a partnership. Then she shared the truth of her past, of a husband and children lost to fever. The story opened a door between them, and Elias finally shared his own sorrow. His wife, Deste, had died 9 years ago, giving birth to their first child, who also died. The women who came before, he explained, wanted him to erase every trace of her. They could not live with her memory. Ruth understood completely. She looked him in the eye and said that loving the dead does not mean you cannot build a life with the living. It was not a promise of romance, but something far more valuable. It was truth. And on that solid ground, they both knew a new life could finally begin. It's a hard truth, but sometimes the folks who claim they want to help are the ones causing the most harm. Ruth learned that on the 5th day, when 3 riders from town showed up uninvited, they weren't there for a friendly visit. They were there to judge her husband, Elias. This story is about choosing to see the good in a person when everyone else sees a stereotype, and if you believe in giving folks a fair shake, stick around. The riders were led by Mr. Bledsoe, who sized up Elias like he was a problem to be solved. "We came to check on Miss Brooks," he said, ignoring Elias completely. Ruth stepped forward. "That's Mrs. Crow to you. We're married." Mrs. Bledsoe's voice was full of pity. "Honey, we're just worried. 4 other women have left this place in tears." Ruth stood firm. "I appreciate that, but I am not them. I am here by my own choice, so I'd thank you to respect it." But they wouldn't let it go. Bledsoe's hired hand spat on the ground. "He's a savage, lady. He's a savage. That blood tells sooner or later." Elias tensed, ready for a fight, but Ruth laid a calming hand on his arm. "I'll handle this," she whispered before turning back to the riders. Her voice was quiet, but sharp as a razor. "Get off our land. Don't come back unless you're invited." The Bledsoes finally turned their horses, leaving a cloud of dust and judgment behind them. Elias watched them go, then looked at the hand Ruth still had on his arm. "You called me your husband." "You are," she said simply, "and I defended you because they weren't worried about me. They were offended by you." The next day, Ruth was alone when a coyote got into the chicken coop. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing a heavy stick, she ran in swinging to protect her hens. The coyote dropped the chicken it had and turned on her, snarling. For a second, Ruth knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The beast lunged. Just then, a rifle shot cracked the air, and the coyote fell dead. Elias was there, his face pale with fear. "Are you hurt?" he asked, rushing to her side. "Did it bite you?" "I'm fine," Ruth said, her heart still pounding. "But it was about to get 3 of our best hens." Elias stared at her, then let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You are absolutely insane." "I'm practical," she corrected him. He pulled her into a hug, holding on tight. This tough, quiet man was shaking because she'd risked herself for a few chickens. "Don't you ever do that again," he said into her hair. "Please." She leaned back and looked him in the eye. "Then you better fix that hole in the fence so I don't have to." That evening, Elias finally told her the truth. The other women, They left because I tried to protect them from everything. From the hardship, the work, the danger. He looked down at his hands. My first wife, Detesta, she told me I was treating her like she was made of glass. After she died, I thought I hadn't protected her enough. So with the others, I smothered them. Ruth listened patiently. That's not protection, Elias. That's a cage. I see that now, he said. You fight coyotes with a stick. You don't want a protector. You want a partner. And I'm not sure I remember how to be one. Ruth stepped closer. Then we'll learn together. Because I'm learning how to be a ranch wife, and you can learn how to be an equal partner. She smiled. Speaking of partnership, I want my name on the property deed. Elias blinked, surprised. You want your name on the deed? If we're building this life together, I want it to be official. Is that a problem? He slowly broke into a grin. No, ma'am, not a problem at all. That night, Ruth lay thinking how 7 short days had changed everything. She went from being the mail-order bride everyone expected to fail, to a woman building a home. She heard a soft knock. It was Elias, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. He had come to thank her for seeing the real man, not the monster the town whispered about. Ruth opened her door and said plainly, I see a good man who works hard and loves deeply. If other folks cannot see that, it is their failure, not yours. That night, for the first time since losing her own children, she slept with a feeling of hope. The next morning, they decided to ride to town. Time to make this marriage legal, Elias said, and face down those gossips for good. In Dry Hollow, the stares and whispers followed them just like before. At the general store, Mrs. Bledsoe's eyes went wide. Miss Brooks, you are still here. Ruth stood tall and corrected her gently. It is Mrs. Crow, actually, and we need to find the circuit judge. The woman's shock turned into a kind of respect. As they left, Mrs. Bledsoe called out an apology. We were wrong about you, she admitted, looking at Elias. Maybe we have been wrong about a few things. The judge was a practical man who got them married and the ranch deed filed with both their names in under 10 minutes. They bought their supplies and rode out of town, never giving the watchers the satisfaction of seeing them falter. On the ride back, Elias said, Well, day 8 starts tomorrow. Ruth corrected him, a smile in her voice. No, it starts now, the moment we file those papers. We are not just testing things anymore, Elias. We are building. He looked at her and gave a real, genuine smile that finally reached his eyes. A nasty storm was brewing on the horizon with clouds piling up dark and angry against the mountains. Elias knew that look. A storm like that could tear the whole place apart if they were not ready. For 7 days, he and Ruth had been learning how to work together, and now they moved in perfect step. They shuttered windows, secured the livestock, and tied down anything that the wind might grab. By the time the first fat drops of rain fell, the ranch was locked down tight. The storm hit with pure fury. The wind howled and thunder shook the very walls of the house. Standing on the porch, watching the raw power of nature, Ruth finally understood why this land demanded so much respect. You scared? Elias yelled over the roar. No, she said, and she meant it. I feel alive. He looked at her with a newfound understanding. He realized he had not just needed a wife who would stay put. He needed a partner who would run toward the storm with him. Ruth simply said, I ran toward a new beginning. You were part of it. Elias smiled. I will take that. The storm raged all night. They ate a cold meal by lamplight as the wind tried its best to rip the roof off. Sometime after midnight, the storm finally gave up. The silence that followed felt heavy. Elias was already on the porch, checking the damage in the moonlight. It is not as bad as it could have been, he said. The house and barn are fine. The animals are safe. We are lucky, Ruth replied. We were prepared, he corrected. There is a difference. She joined him, looking out at the moonlit land that was now her home. "I have been thinking," she began. "For 3 years I have been running from the grief of losing my family. I thought coming here was just running to something new. But maybe I had to run far enough away to finally stop running at all." Elias stayed quiet, giving her the space she needed. "This new life does not erase what I lost," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But it gives me something real to build, and that is more than enough, more than—" As she declared herself his partner and his wife, Elias took her hand. "I am here too," he said softly, "as your husband." The following week settled into a comfortable rhythm of discovery. They learned the quiet details about each other. Ruth learned the old Apache songs Elias sang to the cattle, songs his mother had taught him. She saw how he could track a single calf across miles of hard, rocky ground. Elias, in turn, learned about the nightmares that haunted Ruth, ghosts of the children she had lost. He learned that she needed time alone in the mornings to face her grief before she could face the day. He saw how sharp her mind was with numbers, managing their supplies and expenses better than he ever could. They found a balance, each handling the work that suited their strengths. He took on the heavy labor with the cattle and the fences. She managed the chickens, the garden, and the household finances. They were becoming a team, a division of labor that played to their strengths. Elias handled the cattle and the heavy physical work, fence building, well digging, breaking horses. Ruth managed the household economy, the chickens, the garden, the preserving and planning that turned raw resources into sustainable living. They met in the middle on everything else, learning to work side by side without getting in each other's way, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to communicate in the shorthand that develops between people who spend their days in close proximity. But they were still strangers in the ways that mattered most. They shared a house but not a bed. They shared meals but rarely shared the stories behind their silences. They were partners in survival, but not yet partners in the deeper sense. And both of them felt the weight of that incompleteness, even if neither knew how to cross the distance. The change began with a letter. Ruth found it when she went to collect supplies from town, a monthly trip she'd started making alone after the first few times, when Elias's presence had turned simple transactions into tense standoffs with shopkeepers who couldn't decide whether to fear him or pity her. The letter was waiting at the general store, forwarded from St. Louis, and Mrs. Bledsoe handed it over with barely concealed curiosity. From back east, the older woman noted as if Ruth couldn't read the postmark herself. Family? Something like that. Ruth tucked the letter into her bag without opening it, not willing to share whatever news it contained with an audience. She waited until she was back at the ranch, until the supplies were unloaded and put away, until Elias had ridden out to check the North Range, and she had the house to herself. Only then did she sit at the kitchen table and break the seal. The letter was from Margaret Chen, the only friend Ruth had kept from her St. Louis days, a widow who'd run a boarding house 3 streets over and understood what. The news inside hit Ruth like a physical blow. The letter was from her only friend back in St. Louis, a woman named Margaret. The same terrible fever that had taken Ruth's own children 3 years earlier had returned to the city. It was sweeping through the neighborhoods she used to know, taking families and leaving devastation behind. Margaret wrote of people Ruth had known, children she had cared for, who were now gone. Reading the letter, Ruth was struck by a chilling thought. If she had stayed in St. Louis, she might be dead too. Instead, she was safe in this sturdy house, with a man who was steady and true. She was alive. But the guilt of her survival felt like a sickness in her stomach. Elias found her at the kitchen table as the sun went down. Tears were streaming down her face, though she had not even noticed she was crying. He saw the raw pain in her eyes. For the first time, instead of keeping a respectful distance from her grief, he stepped forward. "Ruth?" he asked gently. She looked up at him, her expression shattered. "It is back," she whispered. "The fever. It is killing people I knew. The orphanages are overflowing and folks are passing faster than they can be buried." Elias sat down across from her. "I'm sorry. I feel like I should be there helping. I survived it once. Maybe I'm immune, but I'm just sitting here safe while good people are dying. You can't save the whole world, Ruth. I couldn't even save my own. The words tore out of her. 3 years of grief uncorked at once. I watched my babies burn with fever. I watched them fight for every breath. And then they were gone. After that, my husband just gave up. He drank himself right into the grave, and I couldn't stop him either. I couldn't save a single soul that mattered to me. She started sobbing, a deep, ragged sound that had been locked away for too long. Elias moved around the table and pulled her close, letting her cry it all out on his chest. He just held her, firm and steady. "You saved yourself," he whispered into her hair. "Doesn't that count for something? Does it? When everyone else is gone?" "Yes," he said, his voice solid with the weight of his own sorrow. "It counts because living is the hardest part. You don't ever discount that." Ruth looked up, her face a mess of tears. "How do you do it? How do you keep going?" "I nearly didn't," Elias confessed. "After Deste and the baby died, I spent a year trying to follow them into the bottom of a bottle. The only reason I'm here is my uncle. He came and dragged me back from the brink. He told me dying was easy, but living took real grit. He said I ought to try living first just to see which one was tougher." "What happened to him?" "He's back on the reservation. He writes that I honor Deste more by living than by following her to the grave." Elias paused. "The same is true for you. You honor your family by living a good life, not by letting their passing be the end of you, too." Ruth just leaned against him, spent. "I'm so tired of being sad." "I know, but the weight gets lighter, and sharing it helps." They stayed that way for a long while until her tears ran dry and the shaking stopped. When she finally pulled back, the kitchen was dark except for a single lamp. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "Don't ever be sorry for being human. Breaking ain't the test. It's the mending that counts." "Can I?" "You already have. More times than you know." Ruth gave a small, tired smile. "You're a lot wiser than you let on." "I've had plenty of practice at breaking and mending," he said, getting up to put a kettle on. "You sit. Let me take care of you for a change." It felt strange to be cared for. Ruth had been the strong one for so long she'd nearly forgotten how to let someone else help. But tonight, she was too empty to fight it. She let Elias make her tea and bring her bread and cheese. She let him talk about small, simple things, like a hawk he'd seen or a problem with an irrigation ditch, until the sharp edges of her grief softened into a dull ache. "Thank you," she finally said. "Partners take care of each other," he reminded her. "That's what you said." That night, Ruth slept without nightmares for the first time in ages. She woke at dawn to find coffee already made and a note from Elias saying he'd handle the morning chores. She took that gift of quiet time and sat on the porch, watching the sun come up. She thought about his words, that living was the real courage, and for the first time she decided to believe him. When Elias came back, he found her in the garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance. "I told you to rest." "I did rest. Now I'm working." He looked at her, and whatever he saw seemed to put his mind at ease. "You look better." "I feel better, or at least I feel like I can function." She sat back on her heels. "I've been thinking about what you said, about honoring the dead by living well. I want to do something that matters. I can't help the orphans back in St. Louis, but what if we built something right here? Not an orphanage, we're too far out. But what if this ranch could be a place that helps people, a place that offers work to folks who need it and puts food on the table for the hungry?" Elias knelt beside her, listening hard. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking there are other women out there like me, widows, women alone who need a safe place to land. I'm thinking that if I can't save the people I lost, maybe I can help the ones who are still here to be found. Does that sound crazy?" "It sounds big," Elias said slowly. "We're barely scraping by as it is." "That's 'cause we're thinking small. What if we thought bigger? Ruth stood and brushed the dirt from her skirt. "Come with me, I gotta show you something." She led him to the small office where he kept his books. She had been studying them for weeks, and now she spread his maps across the desk. "Look here," she said, pointing. "Your water runs to the house, the main trough in the garden. But this map shows the arroyo runs along our entire eastern border. What if we built a series of smaller troughs all along it? We could graze more cattle in places we ain't even using now." Elias studied the map, seeing her logic. "That's rough country out east, but the kind of cattle that can handle it are worth more." "It would take money we don't have," he said. "It would take money we don't have yet," Ruth corrected him. "But if we sold, say, 10 head of the current herd, we'd have the cash to build it. A small loss now for a big gain later." Elias straightened up, looking at her with a new kind of respect. "You've been planning this out." "I've been thinking on it. Planning is different. I needed to know if it was even possible first. You know this land better than anyone. So tell me, is this a fool's dream, or is it just plain hard?" He was quiet for a long moment, tracing the creek bed on the map with his finger, doing the math in his head. Finally, he looked up at her. "It's hard, real hard, but it ain't impossible. If we did it smart, we could likely grow the herd by 30, maybe 40% in 2 years. With that, we could afford to build more housing, to make this a place that could hire folks year-round." He shook his head slowly. "It's ambitious, Ruth." But this time his voice was filled with a spark of hope. Their life settled into a real partnership, planning for the ranch's future over dinner. That easy comfort allowed Elias to finally talk about his first wife, Deste. "She was Apache," he said quietly. "Her people treat feelings like weather. You live through them, you do not fight them." Ruth listened, glad he could honor that memory. "I do not want you to be like her," Elias said, his voice firm. "I need you, just as you are." The honesty between them was a powerful thing. Ruth felt her trust in him grow even stronger. A man who honored his dead instead of forgetting them was a man who took love seriously. He crossed the small kitchen and stopped just in front of her. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice soft. "Do you think someday it would be possible for you to love me?" The question hung in the air, honest and vulnerable, and Ruth knew that this was the real beginning of their life together. That night he asked her if she could ever love him. Ruth thought for a moment. It wasn't a dramatic storybook love. It was something quieter and stronger, built on respect and watching him work day after day. "I think I already do," she said. "The practical kind. The kind that grows slowly but has deep roots." A look of pure relief washed over Elias's face. "That's the only kind that lasts." He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "The love I had before was a wildfire. What we're building, this is a hearth. It's steady. It's warm. It's meant to last." They were two lonely people, learning not just how to survive, but how to build a life. The next morning, they didn't ride to town to file papers. Instead, they walked out to the east pasture and began digging the foundation for their first water station together. They were building their future, one shovel of dirt at a time. Water. "We can line the cistern with it and use less concrete. My uncle showed me some of this. The rest I learned the hard way, by doing and failing until I got it right." They toiled under the Texas sun, breaking only when the heat was too much to bear. Just after noon, the sound of several horses broke the silence. Elias went still. "That is not a sound I like to hear. Out here, riders usually mean trouble." 3 people appeared over the ridge. 2 were rough-looking men, and the third was a younger woman with wary eyes. The man in the lead, who had a long scar through his eyebrow, stopped his horse a ways off. He sized up the digging, then Elias, and finally gave Ruth a long, hard look. "I heard the half-breed got a new wife who decided to stay. Had to come see it for myself." Before Elias could reach for his knife, Ruth stepped forward. My name is Mrs. Crow. You will use it when you speak of me." The man, Carson, just grinned. A feisty one. I like that. He said they worked for the Morrison place, but heard it was selling out. "We heard you are looking to hire people come spring." Ruth was stunned they knew of the plan already. "We might be," she said, choosing her words with care. "It depends on how things go. Why do you ask?" "Morrison is selling to the railroad. That means 40 of us will be out of a job," Carson explained. "We have experience, and we need work." Elias spoke for the first time, his voice low. "Experience does not make a person trustworthy. Why should I hire you?" "Because good hands will not work for an Indian," the other man, Tom, said bluntly. "That leaves you with desperate folks like us." "I care about honesty and skill," Ruth cut in sharply. "What makes you honest?" The woman, Grace, finally spoke. "We have worked that ranch for 3 years without any trouble. We are not trying to fool you. We are telling you straight that we need the work. That is more honesty than most people will give you." Ruth saw the hard truth in their faces. These people were on the brink, and they were gambling that she and Elias were desperate enough to look past old prejudices. "How many good workers are losing their jobs?" she asked. "Out of the 40, maybe 10 or 12 are worth hiring," Carson replied. "If you are hiring, the good ones will find their way here." Ruth looked at Elias. She could see the struggle in his eyes. He needed the help, but his whole life had taught him not to trust strangers like these. "We are not hiring just yet," Ruth announced, her voice firm. "But you can come back in 3 months. If we are ready then, we will consider you. The pay will be fair, the housing will be simple, and anyone who disrespects my husband will be gone before sundown. Is that understood?" Carson gave a mock tip of his hat. "Crystal clear, Mrs. Crow. We will see you in 3 months." As they rode away, Elias spoke quietly. "That was a big risk. Giving them hope could bring trouble. Or it could bring us the workers we need," she countered. "Besides, I only said we would consider them. Now every hand from that ranch will know we might be hiring." "Good. That means we will get to choose the best." Elias shook his head, a small smile on his face. "I cannot decide if you are brilliant or just reckless. Maybe I can be both." Later that night, they talked about what this all meant. "If we hire people, everything changes," Elias said. "It will not be just us anymore. People will depend on us." "That is what a partnership is," Ruth replied. "It is about sharing the work and the responsibility. Responsibility means we carry the load together." "But this is a bigger gamble," Ruth said softly. "You are afraid that if we get too big, you will lose what makes this place special. You worry you will become just another boss, not a man building a dream." He stared at her. "How did you know?" "Because I have that same fear," she admitted. "But we are the ones who decide what this ranch becomes. We can build a place with fair pay and respect for our people, something to be proud of." "That sounds mighty idealistic," he said. "So did marrying a man folks called cursed. Idealism has served me well." Elias chuckled, and the worry in his eyes eased. "All right, your way. But we hire slow and careful. The first sign of trouble and they are gone." "Agreed." Over the next 6 weeks, they finished the first water station. Word got around that the Crow Ranch was hiring. Folks started showing up, curious about the mixed-race rancher and his wife from back east. Ruth met with them all. She was direct and fair, taking names and making no promises, but giving honest hope. As royal blue water finally trickled into their new cistern, Ruth and Elias watched their long-shot bet pay off. "It worked," Ruth said, her voice filled with a bit of wonder. Elias nodded, a slow, satisfied smile on his face. "It sure does. This means we can move 10 head of cattle out here next week. If they take to the rougher grazing, we build another one." He swept his arm toward the mountains. "And another, until we have something that will outlast us both." Ruth took his calloused hand. "We are really doing it." On the ride back, she realized this place no longer felt like his ranch. It felt like their home, one they were building choice by choice. For the first time since losing her children, She was building toward a future, not just surviving the past. And that felt like everything. Word of their success traveled fast, and soon folks looking for work started showing up at their gate. One cold October morning, a lone rider approached from the south. Ruth was hanging laundry and knew right away he was Apache. Her first thought was to get Elias, but she held her ground. The rider stopped his horse about 30 feet away. He was an older man, maybe 60, with a face weathered by a lifetime under the desert sun. "You are the one who stayed," he said, his English thick with an accent. "I am Ruth Crow," she replied. "The others ran from my nephew. You did not. I have come to see if that is courage or foolishness." Realization dawned on her. "You are Elias's uncle." The old man's eyes flickered with something like approval. "He told you of me." "Good. I am called Nachi." "Elias is in the north pasture," Ruth offered. "I will wait," Nachi said. "First I want to see this place my nephew has built and the woman who finally stayed." Nachi walked through their small house, his eyes taking in every detail. He stopped at a weaving on the wall, one made by Deste, Elias's first wife. He touched it gently, a flash of grief crossing his face. "She was my sister's daughter," he said quietly. "Elias told me how much he loved her," Ruth said. "And this does not make you jealous of a dead woman?" Nachi asked, turning to face her. "No," Ruth answered honestly. "A man who can love that deeply is a man I can trust." The other women demanded he forget her, and it broke him a little more each time. "But you do not. You cannot build a future by erasing the past," Ruth said. "I learned that after I buried my own husband and 3 children. Grief becomes a part of you. You learn to live with it." Nachi nodded slowly, a new softness in his eyes. "Come," he said. "Show me this ranch." Together. As they walked the ranch in the cool morning air, Ruth laid out their plans. She showed him where the new water station would go and talked about building something that would last, something that could give folks good work. Nache listened, quiet and thoughtful. His questions were sharp, pointing out problems they hadn't quite worked through. He asked, "You're bringing in a lot of men. What happens when folks who despise my nephew have to take orders from him or from you, a woman?" Ruth met his gaze. "We can't make people respect us. We can only fire the ones who don't." Nachi pressed her. "And if good help is hard to find, will you choose your profits or your principles?" "We'll choose principle," Ruth said without hesitation. "There's no point building a dream if you become a nightmare to do it." For the first time, Nachi smiled, and it changed his whole face. "My nephew chose well. Others see a man torn between 2 worlds. You see a whole man worthy of respect, of—" Just then, Elias rode up. He pulled his horse to a stop, his face a storm of surprise, joy, and a flicker of fear. He swung down from the saddle, his shoulders tight with tension. Nachi said something long and flowing in Apache, and Ruth watched Elias slowly relax. Elias answered back, pointing toward Ruth. Whatever he said made his uncle let out a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise them both. "He says you fought off a coyote with a stick to save his chickens," Nachi translated. "He also says you can figure water usage faster than he can write, and that you make him want to build something that will outlive you both. That's high praise from that one." Ruth felt a blush creep up her neck. "He tends to exaggerate." "No," Elias said softly. "I don't." Later that evening, over a venison dinner Nachi had brought, the talk turned serious. "I came here because I heard my nephew had taken another wife," Nachi said plainly. "I expected to find another disaster, another crack in his heart. Instead, I find you." "What did you expect?" Ruth asked. "I expected to find him trying to shield you from the world just like the others. That's what broke his other marriages. Not his Apache blood, not prejudice, but his own fear. He was so scared of losing them that he built them pretty cages. And one by one they left, because nobody can breathe in a cage, even one made of love." Elias just stared at his plate, his jaw set like stone. "You told me that before," Elias said, "and I didn't listen." "Oh, you listened," Nachi corrected. "You just didn't believe. Believing takes a hell of a lot more courage." He turned to Ruth. "But with you, it's different. He doesn't hide you away. You work right alongside him. You take risks." He smiled a little. "You fight coyotes." To Elias, he said, "You finally learned that a partnership means letting go of control." "I'm still learning," Elias admitted. "That urge to protect her, to wrap her in cotton, it's always there." "That's just fear wearing a mask of kindness," Nachi said. "That is the lesson." Ruth put down her fork. "Nachi, can I ask you something about Desti?" The old man's face grew guarded, but he nodded. "Elias told me she died in childbirth, and that it broke him. But he never said if he blamed himself. I need to know if I'm fighting her ghost, or just his fear." The silence was heavy. Nachi looked from his nephew's shattered expression to Ruth's steady gaze. "My nephew blames himself for many things," he said at last. "Her death is the heaviest. The baby died, too. He had been learning the white man's medicine. He thought he could make it safer. But he tried to use knowledge he didn't truly have." Elias's broken voice confirmed it. "I tried to deliver the baby myself. The midwife was 2 days out. The labor came fast. I'd read books. I thought I knew enough. But I made it worse. I couldn't stop the bleeding. By the time I rode for help, it was too late. She died because I was arrogant." "Or she died because birth is dangerous," Ruth said, her voice firm. "You can't know you made it worse. You only know you tried to help." The midwife said what she needed to say," Ruth cut in, her own past rising in her voice. "My own 2 children died of a fever. My husband did everything the doctor told him. When they died anyway, the doctor hinted that my husband must have done something wrong. And my husband believed him. He drank himself to death with the guilt." Her hands were balled into fists. "But the truth is, children die from fever. Doctors can't always win." And instead of admitting his limits, he blamed a grieving father. She looked straight at Elias. Straight. "Her death is not proof that you failed. It's proof that sometimes terrible things happen and all we can do is our best. That's it." "What if I fail you, too?" Elias whispered, his eyes shining with tears. "What if I can't save you?" "Then you fail," Ruth said simply. "But I would rather live a full life with you, knowing the risks, than live a half-life because we're too scared to try." Nachi then spoke to Elias in Apache. It was a long, quiet speech. With every sentence, Elias seemed to stand a little taller, as if chains were falling away from him. When he was done, Nachi put a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "I told him you are a gift," Nachi explained to Ruth. "A woman who understands that you can't have love without the risk of loss. That it's a price worth paying." He paused. "I also told him Deste would be furious if she knew he'd wasted 9 years being afraid to love again on her account. The dead want us to honor them by living well." "What did he say?" Ruth asked. "He said, for you and for her, he would try." Later that night, sitting on the porch in the cold dark, Elias finally spoke. Finally, "I'm sorry I never told you the truth. I was so ashamed." "Shame is useless," Ruth said, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "It's only good if it changes you. Otherwise, it's just another cage." His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "I am terrified of losing you, Ruth. With Deste, I did not know what I had until she was gone. With you, I know exactly what I stand to lose." Ruth moved closer, taking his hand. "Well then, that makes 2 of us. I buried everyone I ever loved. But living alone and safe is worse than this risk. You taught me that." "How did I teach you that?" he asked. "By staying here alone for 9 long years after she passed. You could have quit, but you kept building. Some might call that stubborn. I call it courage." You were just waiting for a partner. Elias shook his head. I made it impossible for the others to stay. I have to tell you the real reason they all left. He took a deep breath. The first one, Mary, I would not let her go to town by herself. I treated her like a child. And Eleanor, the second one, she wanted to help with the cattle. I kept finding reasons for her to stay in the house. I thought I was protecting her, but I was just making her lonely. He paused, the words heavy in the night air. Catherine, the third one. I hardly spoke a word to her. I just did not know how to let someone in. The fourth, Sarah. She had good ideas for the ranch, but I was so afraid of losing control that I shut her down completely. And the fifth one, Julia. His voice dropped low. I could not stop comparing her to Desti. She told me she could not compete with a ghost. And she was right. Ruth understood it all then. You were just trying to control everything so you would not get hurt again. Yes, he admitted. Nachi helped me see that I had to become a real partner, not just try to find one. But I have to ask you something, Ruth, and I need an honest answer. Are you staying because you want to, or because you feel you have nowhere else to go? Ruth thought for a moment. I first came here because I had no other choice. That is the truth. But somewhere along the way, that changed. Now I am staying because I want to. This ranch, this life with you is my first choice. Knowing you failed before just proves you have the courage to keep trying. I'm going to try to be a better man, Elias said quietly. I will fail sometimes, but I promise I will try. And I will try to be patient, she answered. That is all that matters. He pulled her closer against the cold night air. When the chill finally drove them inside, Elias walked her to her bedroom door. For the first time, he leaned in and kissed her forehead. Thank you for staying, he whispered. Ruth closed her door, her heart pounding. A real change had finally come. There was no turning back now. The next morning, she woke to find Elias and Nachi in the kitchen, speaking softly in Apache over coffee. I leave today, Nachi announced the next morning. But my heart is easier now. My nephew has found what he was looking for. Before he mounted his horse, he looked at Ruth. Take care of my nephew. He is more fragile than he looks. We take care of each other, she replied. He nodded. This is why you will succeed. After he rode off, Elias turned to Ruth. He liked you. Nachi does not like many white people. He said something to me in Apache before he left, Elias continued. He said, This one will stay through the storms, nephew. Hold on to her. Then he told me the time for counting and testing was over. It was time to start living. Ruth smiled, feeling the truth in those words. The testing is over. So what is next? Whatever we build together, Elias said, squeezing her hand. So what comes next for us? Ruth asked, taking his hand. The gesture felt easy now. Elias gave her a slow, genuine smile. We stop sleeping in separate rooms. We stop being so careful with each other. We start living like we believe this is going to last. I want to do that, he said. Let us start right now, she replied. And they did. That evening, after dinner, Elias led her not to her room, but to his. The room overlooked the land they were building together. Are you sure? He asked her at the doorway. I have never been more sure of anything. As the door closed, Ruth felt a deep, steady hope. She believed tomorrow would come, and she would be there to see it. Outside, the stars shone down. Inside, two people who had lost so much decided that just surviving was not enough anymore. They wanted to live together. The next morning, Ruth woke up and saw Elias by the window. He was watching the sun rise over the mountains, his shoulders tense. Having second thoughts? She asked from the bed. He turned, his face filled with wonder and fear. No, just trying to convince myself this is real. That you are real. And that you will not pack up and leave like all the others. Ruth sat up. I am not the others, Elias. When are you going to believe that? I am trying, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. But every time I have believed something good would last, it was taken away. My mother, Dateste, 5 other women. After a while, you start to believe you are the problem. What if the truth is that you are not unlovable, she said. What if the problem was not you, but how you approached things? Nachi said I was so afraid of loss that I tried to control everything. And control is not love. It is just fear. Exactly, Ruth said. I am staying because we are learning together, because you are willing to try even when it is terrifying. What if I fail? What if I push you away without meaning to? Then I will push back, she said. We will figure it out together. That is what partners do. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. I do not know how to do this, Ruth. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. Then we will fall together, she whispered. He kissed her gently, a little of the fear leaving his eyes. I need to tell you something, he said. Today is 7 days since Nachi left. For me, that number has weight. 7 days is how long every other bride lasted before she ran. Understanding hit her like a stone. You have been counting, waiting for me to leave on day 7 like some kind of curse. Yes, he admitted. In the back of my mind, I have been waiting. Ruth cupped his face, her voice firm. Elias Crow, listen to me. I am not leaving today, or tomorrow. I am here. I am staying. And that curse is broken. Do you understand? He finally nodded, exhaling a shaky breath as he chose to believe her. You are right. You are being human, she said. But we get to write a different story. They started their day, but Ruth could feel the tension still humming inside Elias. He was trying to trust, but years of loss are not easily forgotten. She understood. She had her own fears about happiness. The difference was, now they could talk about it. Around mid-morning, while they were fencing a new grazing area, Carson and his crew appeared on the horizon. Ruth had told them to come back, but Elias stiffened at the sight of the riders. Easy, Ruth said softly. We knew they were coming. This is good news, or it means we are about to find out if we can trust anyone out here, he answered. Carson, Tom, and Grace rode up with 2 new workers. They dismounted without an invitation. Mrs. Crow, Carson said with a nod, the expansion looks real. Are you hiring or just dreaming? We are hiring, Ruth said before Elias could speak. But we need people who can follow instructions and treat everyone on this ranch with respect. The new man, older with scarred hands, spat tobacco juice near Elias's feet. You expect us to take orders from him? I expect you to take orders from both of us, Ruth said coolly. This is a partnership. If that is a problem, the trail is right there. Talk eventually turned to a nearby ranch that the railroad had bought for water rights. Elias, who had been silent, finally spoke. The railroad approached me, too. Offered twice what this land is worth. Why turn them down? The older man asked, genuinely curious. Because this land is not for sale, Elias said. Because I built something here that matters more than money. The next day, they interviewed the workers. An older man named Wilson spoke first. I have been working cattle for 30 years. I need fair wages, good food, and a dry place to sleep. We can provide that, Ruth said. Pay is $40 a month plus room and board. You follow our instructions and you pull your weight. Break those rules, and you're gone. Crystal clear, he replied. After talking to everyone, Ruth made her decision. I will hire 3 of you, she announced. Wilson, a woman named Grace who knew about irrigation, and another named Sarah who had the watchful eyes of a manager. A man named Carson who she had rejected scowled. We came all this way for nothing? You came to be evaluated, Ruth corrected him. And you were. That is not nothing. That is a lesson. Take it or leave it. He looked ready to argue, but Grace touched his arm. Let it be. She is right. We are not ready for that kind. After the 2 angry men rode off, the others waited. Elias had been quiet during the interviews, watching Ruth with a look of pride and relief. All right, Ruth announced. Wilson, you will take the small cabin. Sarah, there is a room in the main house for you. Grace, you can share the cabin with Wilson for now with a curtain for privacy. We will build you proper quarters soon. We eat together for breakfast and dinner. Questions? When do we start? Wilson asked. Right now. Get your things put away and learn the lay of the land. The real work begins tomorrow morning on the second water station. It is going to be hard. Anyone having second thoughts? No one moved. Good. Welcome to the Crow Ranch. Do not give us a reason to regret this. Later, she found Elias in the barn. You were incredible today, he said, not looking up from a horse's hoof. The way you handled those men. I could not have done that. You could have, she said. You are just worried about folks seeing you as the mean Indian. That is their own poison talking, not the truth. They will talk in town, he said. The half-breed and his eastern wife thinking they are too good to hire local boys. Let them talk, she replied. We hired the best people. Our success will be the only answer they need. He finally looked up and crossed the barn to pull her into a tight hug. I am so glad you are here with me. Me too, she said. The things worth having are always the scariest ones to reach for. They stood there for a long moment, until angry voices outside broke the peace. Wilson and Sarah were arguing by the water pump. It is not your place to decide, Wilson shouted, his face flushed. I was working ranches before you were born, girl, and I have managed places twice this size, Sarah shot back. Doing something for a long time does not mean you have been doing it right. What is going on here? Elias asked, his voice cutting through their argument. She wants to change where we build the next water station, Wilson complained. Says your spot is all wrong. I told her it is not her call to make. Building where you marked it will cause drainage problems, Sarah said plainly. The whole thing will be undermined inside of a year. The ground level is wrong. If you move it 50 yards north, you use the land to your advantage. Elias walked to the survey stakes he and Ruth had placed. He studied the slope of the land and the way the water would run. Ruth joined him, doing the figuring in her own head. She is right, Ruth said. In the spring, the runoff would eat away at the south bank. Moving it upstream makes it stronger and uses that rock formation as a base. Wilson looked like he had tasted something foul. So her word is better than your plan? Facts are better than feelings, Elias said calmly. We hired Sarah for what she knows. Pride will not build this station, but good sense will. Fine, Wilson grumbled. I will work where I am told. After he walked away, Sarah looked at them with new respect. Most bosses would have stuck with their own plan just to avoid being corrected by a woman they just hired. Well, most bosses are fools, Ruth said. We hired you for your mind. If we ignored it to save our pride, then we would deserve to fail. Always speak up. Discomfort is how we grow. Being too comfortable is how we stagnate. Sarah nodded. That first dinner with the new workers felt mighty strange. Suddenly, their whole life was on display. Ruth could tell it was eating at Elias. He was quiet as a stone. Later, while cleaning up, she asked him what was troubling him. He admitted he hated having strangers in their home, watching their every move. It feels like I have lost control of my own life, he said. Ruth looked him square in the eye. You are not losing control, you are sharing it. Building this dream means we have to let people in and trust them. We cannot let fear of what might happen stop us before we even start. Elias looked worn out. I am trying, Ruth, but every part of me wants to send them all home. She told him to listen to his feelings, but to understand what they really were. Is it fear, or is it wisdom, she asked. Is it based on today, or on your past? These folks have worked hard. The fear is about your history, not about them. He pulled her close. Later that night, Ruth knew they had finally done it. They had made it past the 7th day that Elias had dreaded for so long. The curse was broken. Now the real work of building could finally begin. The road ahead was long, with more building and more workers to hire. It was a reckless gamble, but Ruth had learned that playing it safe was no way to truly live. She felt Elias hold her tighter in his sleep. They had earned each other's trust by being honest when it was hard. They were building more than a ranch. They were building a real partnership where two people could stand as equals. That kind of dream was worth any risk. She decided failing together would be far better than winning all alone. For the first time in a long while, Ruth felt she was truly home. Just before falling asleep, she heard Elias whisper, "Thank you for day 8." She smiled in the dark, knowing their future would be built on their choices, not their fears. The following weeks proved them right. With Sarah, Wilson, and Grace, the ranch grew faster and smarter than ever before. But then, in late November, a true test came rolling in from the north. Ruth saw the dark horizon and felt it in her bones. "We need to secure everything," she told Elias. "This is not just a rainstorm." Elias saw it too, and his face grew grim. "A winter storm. We need to move the cattle to lower ground and batten down the hatches." The whole crew worked with a purpose as the wind began to bite. Wilson and Sarah moved the herd to a sheltered canyon, while Grace and Ruth secured the smaller animals. By the time the storm hit with its full fury of wind and ice, they were all gathered inside. The 5 of them huddled in the kitchen for warmth. Wilson worried about the cattle. "They will need feed by tomorrow," he said. Sarah shook her head. "That canyon is 3 miles away. In this storm, trying to get there is a death trap." "But we cannot lose the herd either," Elias argued back. "Those 30 head are our whole future. If they freeze or starve out there, we are finished before we even get started." Ruth listened to them go back and forth. She could feel the weight of the choice on her own shoulders. This was what it meant to be in charge. Every option was a risk. There was no perfect answer, just different kinds of bad. She finally said, "We will wait until morning." Her voice cut right through their argument. "We will see what it looks like then. If the storm lets up, we take the feed out. If it is still this bad, we wait another day. Losing cattle is awful, but losing our people is a whole lot worse." Wilson said, "Those animals will not last more than 2 days in this cold without food, and we will not last 10 minutes in that storm." Ruth's voice was firm. "We wait. That is final." Even she was surprised by how strong she sounded, but it worked. Wilson gave a small nod, and the room felt a little less tense. They all settled in for a long night, listening to the wind howl outside. Around midnight, Elias found Ruth at the kitchen window just staring into the blackness. He stood beside her and said quietly, "You made the right call." She asked, "Did I? Or did I just pick the disaster I could handle?" He told her, "You chose to put people before property. That is never the wrong choice. Tell that to our bank account if we lose that herd." Elias gently turned her to face him. "We can survive losing cattle. We have survived much worse than this. But if Wilson or Sarah went out there and did not come back, I could not live with that. And you could not either. So yes, you made the right call." Ruth leaned against him, glad for his strength. "I am scared, Elias. Not of the storm. I am scared of what it means. We are so close to making this work, and one bad storm could take it all from us." He said, "Then we will build it all again. That is just what we do. We build, and when it falls down, we build it again, together." She whispered, "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I make a choice that ruins us? Then I will be right here to help you pick up all the pieces. That is what being partners is all about. You do not have to be perfect, Ruth. You just have to do your best and trust that I will be here for you." She looked at him in the soft light. "When did you get so wise?" He gave a small smile. "Right around the time you started believing in me." They stood together in the quiet kitchen as the storm raged on. Ruth felt a sense of peace. They might fail. This storm might take everything they had, but they would face whatever came their way together. And that was more important than any promise of success. The morning came, gray and bitter. The storm was still going, but not quite as wild as the night before. Elias went out to check and came back covered in ice. His face was serious. "It is bad, but it is not impossible. The wind has died down some. I reckon we could make it to the canyon with the feed wagon if we are careful, but it is going to be dangerous." "Then I am coming with you," Ruth said, already putting on her warmest coat. "Ruth, no. You need to stay here where it is safe." She turned and looked him straight in the eye. "Do not start trying to protect me now. We are partners in this, which means we face the danger together. If you are going out in that storm, then so am I. End of discussion." Wilson spoke up from across the room. "She is right. 2 people have a better chance than 1 if things go south. Elias looked at Ruth, his heart telling him to keep her safe from the coming blizzard. He wanted to face the danger alone, but he saw the fire in her eyes and remembered their vow to be true partners. He finally gave a slow nod. "All right, darling. We go together, but we play it smart." They roped themselves to each other, a lifeline in the storm. After hitching the strongest horses to the feed wagon, their friends Sarah and Grace sent them off with hot coffee and a stark warning. "Dead heroes do not run ranches," Sarah told them plainly. The wind howled like a banshee, cutting right through their layers. Twice the heavy wagon nearly slid off the icy trail. But each time, by working as one, they saved it. After a long, brutal journey, they found the cattle huddled at the canyon entrance, hungry but alive. They spent another hour on treacherous, icy rocks, getting hay to the herd and breaking ice so they could drink. Ruth's hands were numb and her face felt like stone, but the animals were fed. They had a fighting chance, and that was all that mattered. The trip back home was even worse. The storm roared back to life, swallowing the world in a white haze. Halfway there, Ruth's horse slipped on a sheet of ice, throwing her into a deep snowdrift. For a moment, all she knew was suffocating cold. Then Elias was there, pulling her out, his hands shaking. "Are you hurt?" he yelled over the wind. "I am fine," she gasped, her shoulders screaming in protest. "We rest when we are home," he said, his voice firm. He helped her back onto the horse, and they pushed onward into the gale. The ranch house appeared through the swirling snow like a ghost, the most beautiful sight Ruth had ever seen. Their crew rushed out to help. Inside, warm blankets and hot soup were waiting. Elias, his teeth chattering, confirmed the cattle were fed and sheltered. "They will make it," he said. Grace, who could read the sky like a book, nodded with certainty. "The storm is already breaking. The worst is over." And she was right. The storm had revealed a deep truth to Ruth. When forced to choose, she found she could bear the heavy weight of leadership. And when Elias pulled her from that snowdrift, she learned that accepting help was not weakness, it was trust. They had survived because together they were stronger. In the weeks that followed, a change settled over the ranch. The workers, Wilson, Sarah, and Grace, no longer just took orders. They started asking for Ruth's opinion and bringing their own ideas to the table. They began sharing stories and advice. They were not just a crew anymore. They were becoming a family. Each person's strength covered for another's weakness. Because of this, the ranch did not just survive the winter, it thrived. The Crow Ranch was transforming from a struggling homestead into a real business. But the biggest change was in Elias himself. He started trusting his crew, delegating tasks instead of controlling every little thing. He listened to new ideas and even learned to laugh more around the dinner table. The guarded man who feared he would fail at partnership was finally building something to last. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold, Ruth sat with him on the porch. "I have been thinking," she said, taking his hand. "It is time to expand. We can handle 10 more head of cattle. That means we need more hands, another cabin, and better deals in town." Elias listened quietly, his mind working through the costs and the risks. "That is ambitious," he said. "It is also expensive. We would need a loan." "I know," she replied, her gaze steady. "That means we're betting the entire ranch, risking everything we've built." "Do you really think this is worth it, Elias?" Ruth gripped his hand. "Playing it safe is its own kind of gamble," she answered. "In this life, you either grow or you die. There is no standing still. So yes, I think it is worth it, but only if we decide this together." He stared at the mountains for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was solid as a rock. "Let's do it. Let's build something that will outlast both of us. Something that proves this whole town wrong about a half Apache man and his stubborn wife. Something that matters," she added. That night, she realized it was no longer his ranch. It was theirs. The next morning, Ruth woke up feeling strange, not sick, but different. A deep knowing settled in her bones before her mind could name it. She was pregnant. The feeling brought a wave of pure joy followed by a cold tide of terror. She had loved and lost children before, and the thought of that pain was almost too much to bear. Elias found her sitting on the bed, his face etched with worry. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I am not sick, Elias. I am pregnant. We are going to have a child." She watched his expression shift from shock to joy, and then to a fear so deep it mirrored her own. He knelt beside her. "Are you certain?" "As certain as a woman can be." He pulled her into a fierce hug, and she could feel him trembling. "I am terrified," he whispered. "After what happened with Deste." "I know," she said. "I have buried 3 of my own. I am terrified, too." "But you are not going to wrap me in cotton wool," Ruth said firmly. "I will keep working. I am pregnant, not made of glass." "I just cannot lose you, Ruth. I barely survived losing Deste. Losing you and our baby, I would not survive that." "Then we will do everything we can to make sure that does not happen," she said, holding his face in her hands. "We will be smart, and we will be careful. The rest is not up to us." As word got out, the whole town suddenly had an opinion. Mrs. Bledsoe appeared one afternoon full of advice. "You should be resting. A woman in your condition should not be out in the sun." "A woman in my condition is perfectly healthy," Ruth replied calmly. "But I do appreciate your concern." "Well, with your age, your past, and what happened to his first wife, people are worried. People should mind their own business," Ruth said. But when Mrs. Bledsoe offered real help for the birthing, whatever their differences, Ruth's anger softened. "Thank you," she said. Later, Sarah grinned. "Funny how the town cares now that you are carrying Crow's child. It is not about me. It is about the baby." "Still, you would be wise to accept their help," Sarah advised. "Pride does not deliver babies safely." Ruth knew she was right. She would bring in her own doctor, but having experienced women nearby was just good planning. As summer arrived, the ranch expanded. The loan was a heavy weight, but Elias's resolve was heavier. "We will not fail because we cannot afford to fail," he would say. "Forward is the only direction we have." By fall, the ranch was transformed, a symbol of their thriving partnership. When Ruth's labor began on a cool October morning, she was not alone. Elias was by her side, and a community of women, including Mrs. Bledsoe and Sarah, were there to help. Her doctor from the city was calm and skilled. But when things went wrong, it was the combined knowledge of modern medicine and the practical wisdom of those ranch wives that saved them. Just after midnight, Elias's son was born, screaming his arrival to the world. As Ruth held him for the first time, her hands shaking, she felt a powerful, unshakable hope. Ruth looked down at her newborn son, her heart filled with exhaustion and a powerful love. "He has your eyes," Elias whispered, his own voice thick with emotion as he sat beside her. "And your stubbornness, I bet." Tears streamed down his face. "We did it, Ruth. We survived." They named him Daniel after her father. He was born into a family that would fight for him, a community that would protect him. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Elias had always carried a deep fear that to love someone meant you would lose them. But as he cared for his wife and his son, he learned to live with that fear. He chose love over safety, because a life without it was no life at all. Daniel was 2 months old, and the ranch had grown so much that Ruth and Elias were now managers, not just laborers. They had built a team, a future, and a family. Out in the Texas dust, folks said the rancher Elias was plain cursed. 5 women had tried to be his wife, and every last one of them bolted in under 7 days. So when a grieving widow from back east named Ruth showed up, haunted by her own losses, everyone in town just started a countdown. They figured she was just looking for a roof, and he was looking for a ranch hand. But this story is about how 2 broken people who thought they were just surviving ended up building something that would last a lifetime. It proves that a true partnership isn't some fairy tale. It's a choice you make every single day. Ruth and Elias had a deal, see? He wrote that he needed a partner, not a decoration, someone who understood that life out here was hard work. and she thought she was just accepting a life of safety. But a strange thing happened. She saw past the tough exterior to a man who was just scared to let anybody in. She chose to stay past that seventh day, to fight for her place not just as a worker, but as an equal. He thought he was getting someone to tolerate him. Instead, he got someone who saw him, truly saw him, and chose him anyway. That changed everything. One cold winter night, with their baby boy Daniel sleeping nearby, the truth finally came out. Elias took her hand, his voice cracking just a bit. He said, "I love you, Ruth Crow. I love you for staying, for seeing me, for believing in this when nobody else did." And she said it right back with tears of pure happiness in her eyes. "I love you too," she said, "for letting me in, for giving me a reason to stop running from life and start running toward it." The curse of 7 days was well and truly broken. Their happy ending wasn't a storybook romance. It was better. It was the quiet reality of a life they built piece by piece. The half-Apache rancher everyone called cursed had found his partner. The eastern widow everyone said would run had planted her roots deep in the Texas soil. Together, they proved the best stories are not about perfect people. They are about broken people who find each other and build something whole. Their love wasn't magic. It was a choice. They chose to trust when it was terrifying, and to build when it seemed impossible. And that was more than enough. It was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.